WFSU-FM now presents a delayed broadcast of the Economic Club of Florida luncheon meeting of June 21, 2016. This program was recorded at the Florida State University Alumni Center in Tallahassee. Now, to introduce the program, here's Economic Club of Florida President Dominic Calabro.
Again, welcome to the 485th in our series of distinguished speakers. I am Dominic Calabro, and I'm honored to be your president this year. The upcoming program will have the American University professor, Leonard Steinhorn, will be here on Thursday, July 7th, to talk about new opportunities and challenges in the nation of Cuba. Next item we have is the Stan Tate Award. We will need nominations. Nominations for the 2016 Stan Tate Memorial Award are open. The award is designed to recognize a current or former club member who's in good standing, who displays the kind of character, dedication, integrity, and passion for service that was epitomized by our founding member, Stan Tate. Nomination forms are available on the website or by calling the Economic Club of Florida office. We need to receive your nominations by September 15th. They can be done by email, regular mail, snail mail, or online. Now, I'd like to recognize some of our student members. I'd like to recognize our FAMU and FSU student members in the audience. Please stand. Let's recognize them. Thank you. Thank you. We also have a guest here from Miami, Dr. Robert Cruz. Bob, where are you? Please stand. Thank you, Bob. Bob's our chief economist at Florida Tax Watch. Now, beginning on my far left, your right, is, we all know, our immediate past chairman is doing a fantastic job with our tax dollars, investing billions of dollars, and that's Ash Williams. Ash is our club's immediate past chairman and serves as the executive director and chief information officer for the State Board of Administration, which manages assets granted by the state's Board of Trustees. Before joining the State Board of Administration, Ash was a managing director at Fir Tree Partners and previously served in senior management positions in Florida's executive and legislative branches. Ash holds a Bachelor of Science degree and a Master of Administration degrees from Florida State University. Go Noles, Ash. On my far right, of course, our speaker, Mr. Larry Fink, will be introduced in a moment by Ash Williams. On my far right, your left, is Cindy O'Connell. Cindy is the inaugural director of the Stanley G. Tate Florida Prepaid College Foundation, an organization governed by the Florida Prepaid College Board, the largest in the United States, with assets in excess of $15 billion. She most recently served very ably and very successfully as Secretary of the Florida Lottery, with a growth rate during her 5 years of over 38%. And of course, a dedicated Gator. Cindy is a member of many boards, including University of Florida Foundation, Florida House in Washington, D.C., and the Economic Clubs of Florida for many, many years, as well as a former member of the Tax Watch Board. To her left, your right, is Sammy Dixon, Jr. Sammy is the CEO and president of Prime Meridian Bank, a very successful community banker he helped form in 2007. In 2015, American Banker magazine ranked Prime Meridian Bank number 12 nationally as one of the best banks to work for. Quite impressive, Sammy. Go ahead, why not? I'm an investor, so keep it up. Sammy is a member of the Rotary Club of Tallahassee, a board member of Big Bend Hospice Foundation, the Boys and Girls Clubs of the Big Bend and Tallahassee Memorial Hospital Foundation, and he also attends St. Peter's Anglican Church. Last but certainly not least, one of my favorite former justices and chief justices, Justice Stephen Grimes. As you just mentioned, he's former Chief Justice of the Florida Supreme Court, retired, I think, for the second or third time in his illustrious career, and retired from the law firm of Holland and Knight. He's also a long-time Chicago Cub fan, and of course, a Florida Gator. Please welcome the head table. Now, if I could bring up Ash Williams, who's very kind to secure our speaker. Ash?
Thank you, Dominic, and welcome members. Thank you all for being with us this afternoon. And I have to clarify one point. Dominic gave me credit for something I can't take credit for. I'm actually only a chief investment officer, not a chief information officer. Quite all right. I'm going to hit a few high points from our echo for the benefit of our subsequent radio audience. We're proud to welcome Mr. Lawrence D. Fink today, founder, chairman, and chief executive officer of BlackRock Incorporated. He also leads the firm's global executive committee. He and 7 partners founded BlackRock in 1988, and under his leadership, the firm has grown into a global leader in investment management, risk management, and advisory services. Mr. Fink serves as a member of the Board of Trustees of New York University. He's co-chairman of the New York University Langone Medical Center Board of Trustees. He also serves on the boards of the Museum of Modern Art, the Council on Foreign Relations, and Robin Hood, the poverty-fighting charitable organization. He's also an executive committee member of the Partnership for New York City, the Economic Development Organization for Greater New York. Mr. Fink earned an MBA with a concentration in real estate from the University of California, Los Angeles, where I learned he was their speaker at their most recent commencement, lucky students, and a BA degree in political science from UCLA in 1974. Now, a little background on BlackRock, the firm that Larry built. There are a handful of people in the world who really changed things. I mean, think of Steve Jobs and folks like that. I honestly think Larry Fink fits in that category. If we look at BlackRock, the organization that Larry and his partners founded and that he to this day leads, he has created a diverse investment platform of extraordinary depth and breadth, reaching across public and private markets, offering fixed income, equity, and real asset strategies. Recognizing that risk is every bit, if not more important than return, BlackRock has also developed industry-leading investment risk and analytics platforms, empowering the firm and its clients to see, understand, and manage their risks holistically. It's an organization, as their annual report says, built for change, committed to constant innovation, always willing to lead with new thinking, technology, strategies, and products. But the things that shouldn't change don't, like investing responsibly for the long term, maintaining the highest ethical standards, and aligning BlackRock's interests with those of their clients. Larry Fink has created a business model of relevance in a world with less growth and more uncertainty. The merits of his approach are recognized by the global financial community and reflected by a $56 billion market capitalization, the largest asset management business in the world with $4.75 trillion in assets, 13,000 employees in 30 countries. BlackRock is there to meet client needs, and on behalf of the Economic Club of Florida, the million beneficiaries of the Florida retirement system, with whom BlackRock is a major partner, and all the citizens and taxpayers of Florida, for whom BlackRock's effort cut the cost of our operations. We thank you for being with us, Larry. We welcome you, and we look forward to your insights.
What a pleasure in being here today. Thank you for lunch. So let me talk about the world. We live in a world today of great uncertainty. We live in a world of incredible change, and this is one of the main themes about how we're trying to organize BlackRock, to be able to be in front of the change so we could be responsive to our clients. But I do believe we live in a world of great change, and reality is most people don't like change. Change makes us uncertain, and that uncertainty, it produces a lot of anxiety, and that's where we are in the world today. And I'm going to give a talk about all this uncertainty, and hopefully I don't make you more agitated, because I do believe there are silver linings to all this uncertainty. So why don't I just start off in talking about China, and then navigate around the world. So one fact that I think most Americans don't understand how large China has become in the world. In the first quarter of 2016, China's growth represented 49% of the entire world's growth. 49%. If you have visited China, parts of China like Shanghai, 15 years ago had a population of approximately 9 million people. It's now close to 28 million. So it's grown 2 New York cities in that span. And all the accompanying buildings and dwellings and all that. So China has been this incredible growth story, but China now is facing some severe issues. And so China's leadership, who I give a lot of credit for trying to re-engineer its economy, China is now trying to reorient its economy away from this export-driven manufacturing economy to a more of a service-oriented economy and a more domestic-oriented economy. It took the United States 50 years to become that. It took Europe the transformation from a manufacturing-dominated economy to a service economy 50 years. And in between, when you've navigated this, you've had a couple recessions. So China has a 10-year plan to try to reorient its economy. And as I said, because it represents such a large component of world growth, if China gets it wrong, it has profound impact on the entire world. And China's at a period now where it's slowing down. Its growth is truly slowing down. So they're in their 4th year of their 10-year plan of trying to reorient its economy with modest success. But to do that with an economy as large as China, and China is now the 2nd largest economy just under the United States in terms of the position where that economy is. We have approximately 320 million people. They have 1.2 billion people. So we're talking 4x the amount of population that we essentially have. So you have to just understand the magnitude of this. And the other thing, if you are a global citizen for a moment, in the last 20 years, we've seen a bigger rise of middle-class population worldwide than we ever did in humanity. So with all this uncertainty here in the United States, uncertainty in Europe, if you had your global citizen hat on, you would say, this has been a fabulous time. Because as a global citizen, if you're a citizen of all humans, you would say, this has been an extraordinary 20 years of the rising of standard of living, less poverty worldwide. And China's been a big contributor to that in terms of the expansion of it. To give you another relative statement, China still has a few 100 million people in poverty. So it's not a perfect society by any means. It's still a developing country. So for China to do this navigation, though, to move from manufacturing to an economy that's more self-reliant, as a juxtaposition, 80% of the US economy is based on domestic demand. 80% of the Chinese economy is based on exporting. So that, back 100 years ago, 80% of our economy was based on export. So we all go through this path. But it's a really remarkable story watching what China's trying to do. So China it's still a very state-owned enterprise nation. Most of the major companies of China that are non-internet based are owned by the state. And many of the companies that are in the manufacturing side are really badly run companies. But they're there to produce jobs. And so one of the big trade issues we have between the two countries now, they're manufacturing more steel, manufacturing more of these items just to keep jobs going there. bringing the cost down of steel worldwide, which is good if you're making buildings and things like that. Very bad if you're trying to look at our steel economy at the US or the European steel economy. So you have all these issues. But for China to rapidly transform itself, it has to close most of these companies and have those jobs transfer to healthcare needs, to tourism, to all the service-oriented components of an economy. And as I said, they're doing it, but not well enough. Now let's talk about some demographic issues. I said 1.2 billion people, but China, because over many generations now, has a one-child family law. China is rapidly aging very, very rapidly. China has no safety nets like Social Security, like we have in our nation. China doesn't have a national healthcare system. It has modest healthcare systems. It has a modest retirement system, but not to the needs of a middle-class society today. And so what we're seeing in China now, think of this. Pause for a second and think about what percent of your earnings, what percent of those earnings do you save for your retirement? Right now in China, and this is one of the big problems of global growth, the Chinese are saving 50% of their disposable income. 50%. We as a nation save about, if you add up your retirement and you add up your personal savings, maybe it's 10 or 11%. If you step out what the firm is contributing, it might be down to 6% in this country. So if we went to 12% as a saving nation, we'd be in a depression. And yet China is saving 50%, because there's not a safety net. And you only have one child. And so you have all these problems that are associated with the demographic issue of China, but also you have the problems of China having this rapidly aging society. And so we'll see how China navigates this. China's economy is slowing down. It's slowing down to something between 7 and 6%. You know, wouldn't we dream if we had an economy growing at 3 or 4%? So despite its size, it's still growing quite rapidly, but not fast enough for the world economy now. So China is a story of transition. China is a story of change. We'll have to see how this 10-year plan works out. Can China sustain a 6% GDP and transform its economy? We'll see. There are many investors in the world who don't believe that China can sustain its economy. That its debt load in China today to sustain its economy is bigger than the US debt load was in 2007. So to finance this extraordinary fast-growing economy, it was based on a debt. And the question is, can that be sustained? And we'll see. But China is representing some major uncertainty in the world. And we'll see how that plays out. And I'm not, I'm going to say, I believe probably about a 70% probability that China will be able to eke this out. The problem is the other 30%, if I'm wrong, it's a big, deep, deep hole. And it would create a pretty severe global problems. I don't want to say global recession, but it would be pretty severe. Let me just rapidly move to two other nations in Asia that have big impact. The third largest economy in the world is Japan. Another nation that has very bad demographics, very fast aging society. The fundamental problem of Japan too is with its bad demographics, aging society, it has vast savings. But that now savings is going to begin to be depleted as many people are going from working to retirement, and then they're going to start spending their savings. Japan, unfortunately, since 1991, has been in basically zero growth now for 25 years. No growth at all. The opportunities for the young generation is not great. And now we have a new Prime Minister, Abe, who's been around for 3 years. He's trying to reset the Japanese economy. it looks like maybe this year the Japanese economy could grow 1.5%, maybe 2%, which will be the fastest growth in 25 years. So we're starting to see a little elevated growth in Japan. However, in doing so, Japan had to devalue its currency by 30%. Over the course of the last 25 years, the Japanese currency appreciated about 40% versus the dollar. And just in the last 3 years, it devalued itself about 30%. And at one point, it was almost close to that 40% when the yen got to 120 to the dollar. And it was as low as 78. And now it's back to about 105 to the dollar. And so Japan, we're starting to see a modest increase in the growth. And for the third largest economy in the world, that's okay. But with the Chinese slowdown, the Japanese increase is not helping as much. Japan also has some severe issues. Like, let me ask all of you a question, and this will symbolize Japan. Think about all your electronics that you had in your home 20 years ago, like a Sony or a Hitachi or all the Japanese named companies. How many of you had a Japanese product? Just raise your hand 20 years ago. Looks like the majority of you had some form of. How many have a Japanese product today, though? Samsung's Korean, by the way, so don't get confused. I don't see anybody. No one has a Sony product. Oh, a few. There's a few. Okay, only a few. That symbolizes what happened in Japan. Japan stopped innovating. Because the recession was so severe, its companies did not have the money to put back into research and development, and they stopped innovating. And that's one of the real issues. And that's going to be one of my global themes, why change, we have to have a dynamic economy to compete in the world. And Japan is a great symbolism of an economy that was probably the most innovative economy in the late 70s, early 80s. There were books written about how Japan was going to lead the world. Right around 87, 88, there were all these books about how Japan is the dominant economy in the world and they're going to pass everybody. And 2 years later, after all those books were written, it collapsed. And it has not rebounded since. If you haven't been to Tokyo, I would recommend. It's one of the greatest cities in the world. I mean, so to keep that economy alive, the amount of infrastructure spent in Japan is enormous, and so it's a magnificently modern city, beautiful. If you ever wanted to be a tourist, that's a great place to be. India. So India has another new prime minister. So we're talking about new governments, and these new governments are trying to make change. As I said, Abiy's trying to make changes. I don't think he's making enough changes. President Xi in China is making a lot of changes, but let's see how that plays out. And then we have Prime Minister Modi in India. If you think we have a bureaucracy in this country, you can't get anything done in India. I mean, the bureaucracy is so hard. India is being held back by the mixture of state, city, local government, and federal government, and the interchange. It's very hard to get anything done in India. And that's probably the biggest problem of India. I brought a group of investors to New Delhi last year. Ash came with me, where we spent a day. We were invited by the Prime Minister to learn about what the Prime Minister is going to do in India. And the Prime Minister has been very effective. The economy 3 years ago was growing about 5.8% GDP, and now it's growing about 7.8% GDP. So India is starting to reaccelerate despite all the bureaucracy. The Prime Minister told us India is ranked, I think, 158th out of 180th in terms of ease of doing business. And he said, he made it as a joke, obviously, but he said, if we could get to 130th, look at the improvement. It's all relative. Obviously, we'd be very unhappy as a nation if we were even close to that. But that's the opportunity in India, which we like over a long cycle. And as I said, so India is 1/3 the size of the economy of China, and seeing now India growing faster. And there's a great opportunity in India over the long cycle, and especially if the Prime Minister, who today announced some major changes to allow more participation in India. There was a whole article about how maybe Apple now will be able to open stores in India. So that's a breakdown of bureaucracy and all that. So I think the Prime Minister is doing a very good job of slowly changing its economy, and the economy is starting to do much better. So if you look at the 3 largest economies in Asia, it's good, not great. It's not terrible, but the noise and the conversation makes it look much worse. And this is just the consternation I think the world has now. Now let me move to Europe, and then I'll get to the United States. Europe is actually facing much of the same thing that the United States is, but only worse. Europe has terrible demographics. Europe has done a terrible job of assimilating immigrants, and we have great tensions now throughout Europe related to migrants, and this is creating quite a bit of stress all throughout Europe. Europe also did not rapidly address its problems after the Great Recession. So the one thing about America, which it's going to sound funny, but I'm pretty proud of America in this respect. When we screw up as a nation, we generally admit it faster than most other nations. And we're like young children. And remember when you have your young children and your child's sick, the child throws up, and about 10 minutes later it says, "I feel better"? Well, that's what I think about our economy. We threw up, we got to... So, I'm talking about the 2007-8 crisis. What we did as a nation, and I give a lot of credit to Secretary Geithner and the stress tests, but we rapidly restructured the banking system of the United States, more rapidly than any other country that had a structural problems within its banking system. And from 2009, and this is why we had the big rally after beginning of the second quarter of 2009, where we had this huge equity rally up until 2014. We had a 5-year rally in the equity markets. Much of it was a foundation of resetting our banking system, forcing them to add huge sums of equity capital. Now going back to Europe, Europe has now done the same type of stress tests that we did in 2009. They did them 3 times. Why 3? The first 2 times, I guess it's fair to say they weren't real stress tests. They didn't adequately reveal the structural problems of the banking system of Europe. And the problem in Europe was the banking system was more responsible for the lending than even the banking system in the United States. And so Europe did not rebound quick enough because its banking system was still undercapitalized, and so Europe was much slower. And obviously we had the debt crisis of Greece, the debt crisis of Ireland, the debt crisis of Spain and Portugal, and the governments were not quick enough to adapt to their fiscal policies and problems in Europe. Now fast forward today, the banking system is much better. And yet there are still articles every day about one of the European banks that still has problems. You don't read that about our banks in the United States at all. The European banking system still has some structural flaws, which is then clogging up the arteries. You don't see the free flow of money. And this is why the ECB, the European Central Bank, is actually much more aggressive than our central bank, the Federal Reserve. Now, the reason why I'm going to bring this up now, because my second part of my conversation, I want to talk about retirement. But at this moment, between the Bank of Japan, who has been as I said, forcibly bringing down the value of its yen. But more importantly, what we're seeing in Europe, what the ECB is doing, they have been so active in trying to re-energize the economy that we now have $10 trillion of bonds that have negative interest rates. In other words, if you wanted to take out a mortgage, like a one-year floating mortgage in Europe, the bank pays you money for the mortgage. Negative interest rates. And we'll get into this in a little while, but $10 trillion of money now is negative. All the way out to the 10-year point of the, so you could even get a 5-year mortgage probably with negative interest. A bank pays you money. Now, how can you have, when you think about how much money is sitting in retirement, that's sitting in short-term bonds or in cash, and in France, to name one country, 62% of people's retirement money is still sitting in bank accounts. And now you are being charged money to put your money in a bank. They charge you. You don't earn interest. You are being charged. What do you think that does to confidence? What do you think that does to, if you're trying, if you're 40 years old and you're trying to build that pool of money so you can live in retirement in dignity, and you don't have that much, and you're not getting any compounding of that money. So what your natural inclination is to save more, consume less, and that, in my mind, degrades the economy, actually pushes down the economy. So here we all thought about having interest rates when they're lower and lower and lower, it accelerates the economy. I think we get to a pivot point where it doesn't accelerate the economy, it harms the economy, and I think that's what's going on now. And that's creating a lot of this anxiety and uncertainty. Now let me talk about some governmental issues, which is going to be my translation into the United States. We have now seen, because of all this uncertainty in Europe, an anguish. Many of the European families feel the same anguish that a lot of American families feel, that in the last 10 to 20 years, wages have not gone up that much, and yet healthcare costs have gone up, education costs have gone up, food costs have gone up, and everybody's feeling a little more frightened about the future. In Florida, we have approximately 4.7% unemployment. In Europe, unemployment's still around 10% in most countries, not in Germany, but in most of the other countries, not in the UK. In addition, youth unemployment is in the high teens to the 20s. So young people who are trying to get jobs are having a hard time getting jobs. This is 7-8 years after the financial crisis. It's still hard to get jobs. So the children are still living home, creates more anxiety, more uncertainty. So how that's being translated in, just 2 weeks ago there was an election in Austria. And an individual almost won who basically represents what you would call a modern day version of a fascist party. They lost that fascist, or whatever you want to call that party, a far, far right-wing party that advocated some very ugly issues. That person lost only by about 1,000 votes. Now, in Rome this past weekend, you had a novice politician, 39 years old woman, who ran on a platform that was very, very leftist, as socialist as you could ever imagine. She won. In Spain, in the following week, there's going to be a new Spanish election. Because the election for prime minister this past November failed to produce a government. So Spain has not had a government now for 8 months. And the king is involved, who's more of an official, but trying to reconcile all the parties. In these parliamentary parties, you generally have coalition governments. You don't have, it's very rare to have one party to have full control. You generally have to go negotiate with one of the other parties, and you create a coalition government. The parties can't agree. And so they have not been able to create a coalition government. And the really interesting thing about Spain is the Rajoy government actually has created probably the strongest economy in Europe. Spain's growing at 3%. Now, it's a far way from where it was. The Spanish economy is still lower today than it was 10 years ago. So it had a lot of negative growth right after the Great Recession, and it had a massive housing crisis, and many of their companies went bankrupt, and at one time youth unemployment in Spain was 28%. And so the Rajoy government will probably be the leading government in this election in 2 weeks, but its coalition is probably going to be a very far left party. And now, on Thursday, tomorrow's Wednesday, so it's Thursday, we have what we call the Brexit vote. Will the UK leave the European Union? If you step back again, the UK has unemployment of 4.7%. It has consistent 2% GDP growth. It has probably been as consistent of a grower of any economy in Europe. And yet, whether we have Brexit or don't have Brexit, 47, 48%, even if it doesn't happen, will be voting to leave the European Union. Once again, it's this anxiety, this uncertainty of a future. And this is what's creating all this anxiety. So if you think what's going on in our election year here coming up, whether it's Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders, it is the same phenomenon, and it's happening in many democracies, that people are frightened of their future, and we need to have government to act. And I'll go talk about my silver lining in a bit, but and so I think Brexit is not going to happen. I think we'll narrowly be defeated, and so to stay in the European Union will win by 1 or 2 or 3%. But it is my belief the Cameron government has no choice but to respond to this. When you have 47 or 48% of your populate going totally against what your policies are, if you are going to be a successful leader in the future, you're going to have to respond to this. And I will say here in the United States, whether it's Hillary or Donald Trump, both candidates will have to respond to this anger too in the United States. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So let me just talk about the U.S. economy overall. The U.S. economy is growing at 2-ish%. We have grown faster out of the Great Recession than any Western economy. We do have the most innovative economy in the world. And that is one of the strengths of this nation, the quality of our educational system, our university systems. And we can never forsake that. We always, as a country, I don't care what side of the political spectrum you're on, we have to be the most innovative society in the world or we are going to lose. It is imperative that we make sure that we have the educational systems from preschool all the way up, that we have the most innovative systems in the world so we can compete in this global world. And I do believe the world is changing, and I think the world is going to be changing very rapidly. And I think it's going to be uncertain for many people and what that means. But I don't believe we can turn our backs to it. And the one thing I will say very loud and clear, we cannot turn our back to the world as a country. It is a global world. And if we think we could turn our backs to the world, we're crazy. We are the largest exporter in the world. I mean, here when we talk about global trade and people are against trade, and yet this is the biggest nation in the world for trade. We sell more goods outside this country than any nation in the world. More than China. And yet there's this misunderstanding that trade's bad. Our great companies in this country have relied on the global trade opportunities, and so many jobs have been created by that. So many small companies that are service providers of large companies are a major component of that. And I will say right now, I'm speaking as a Democrat, and I've been a lifelong Democrat, and if we do not focus on how we innovate and create through great education, we will then fall behind even further than some of us may think. But nevertheless, families have been left behind, and that's why we have this anger. We can't turn our back to that anger also. We have to find solutions. I believe the silver lining to all this political uncertainty and economic uncertainty has to be a change in behaviors of governments. Right now, I believe the central banks, like the Federal Reserve, the Central Bank of Europe and Japan and China and India, these have been the leaders of the world. If it wasn't for the central banks of the world, we'd be still in a recession. These men and women who have boldly pushed the envelope beyond any historical measure of trying to reestablish and restabilize our economies have done a tremendous job. The problem is we've had governments rely on central bank behavior, and we have governments who've now not done enough to really reboot our economies. As a nation, we spend the lowest amount of GDP in infrastructure. As we know, not in Florida, so you may not know this, but most states in the country are having huge deficit issues, funding issues. What's happening in Puerto Rico may happen with other states. And as a result of it, we are seeing a slowdown in spending in so many states and local governments. And so this is not just a federal issue, it is a state and local government issue. So I believe the silver lining to all of this is about more fiscal spending for infrastructure. We, the UK, I think David Cameron needs to do the same thing. We need to spend more investing back in our nation in infrastructure. And that's going to create so many of the jobs or so many of the families who've been left behind by technology. And innovation. And that's why innovation, we may love it, but some of us hate it too. If we can create those jobs for those families, I do believe we'll have a more dynamic economy. And keep in mind, we have 4.7% unemployment as a nation. If we created all these jobs in infrastructure, we will have wage inflation. We might even have 2 to 3% inflation, which will allow the central bank to start raising rates again. And that is my prescription for Europe, and that is my prescription here for the United States, that we need to do these. So let me just quickly link all this into retirement. No one wants to talk about retirement. Retirement is probably the greatest crisis we're going to face in this country, and no one wants to talk about it. The inadequacy of retirement today is going to hit us very deeply in the next 10 years. Whether it is a state that can't afford the benefits or don't have the money, or they may have the money, but it means they're not going to have any money to spend for infrastructure. It all links together. It's all one thing. But the problem is, as we moved and navigated so much of our pension funds away from defined benefit plans to defined contribution plans, we have not educated our citizens for better, more robust financial literacy. That's one of the great problems of my industry. We have not done a good job of educating and helping families build a better financial future. And I believe we're at a point now, because the under-savings, the under-investing we have as a nation for retirement, is going to be a big, colossal problem in the future. The average American, between their Social Security benefits that they're going to receive and their personal savings, will be left with about an average income of about $27,000 a year. That's it in retirement. That's what we estimate. That's poverty. The math is there, and yet we don't want to talk about it. But the average American is going to be left with $27,000 a year because they have not saved enough. Maybe they could not afford it. They had to live or other issues, or they lost their jobs, or they couldn't find the proper job, but we have not educated enough to help people think about savings. And this is going to be a real key issue. Now, the Department of Labor in the United States just came up with a new rule for fiduciary standards, telling all the intermediaries that you have to now always have the client's best interest. You would have thought they always had their best interest, but the new fiduciary rule elevates that interest. And hopefully that will help. You know, talk about technology. Technology through digital advice is going to help financial literacy. But as the Economic Club of Florida, I implore you to focus on retirement and the retirement needs of Floridans, because it is going to be a big, big crisis in every state. Not the members of the state fund, because you have Ash and team helping you out, but I'm talking about all the Floridians who have a defined contribution plan, or are working and just don't have the amount of contributions to meet their needs. So you're going to see even a bigger divergence in how people are going to be during retirement. But we need to just address this big issue, and we at BlackRock are spending more and more time trying to educate. We created a new financial tool called iRetire, where you could plug in about how much money do you need in retirement, and we could help you. What does that mean in investing and return and all that? So it's a pretty nifty calculator. There's an app for it called iRetire. So it's an interesting way of thinking about how to think about retirement. But we believe this is going to be a big issue. As the largest asset manager in the world and the largest pension fund manager in the world, we are trying to take that upon our responsibility to be focusing on these things. So we are going to be living in a world of great uncertainty, great change. I think there are silver linings to this and great opportunities. And the greatest opportunity is not turning our back to technology, but to embrace technology and to try to then serve society when technology is changing some people in the workforce and their jobs, either through new retraining or other ways of finding jobs is going to be important. But we can't turn our back to that. Let me give one last view about technology. It is our view that technology is going to only accelerate opportunities for jobs and harming other jobs. At this moment in the United States, we have 500,000 job openings at $100,000 on average for programmers. And we don't have enough skill sets with our talent pool to seize those jobs. The inflation rate for technology individuals today is over 7% a year in terms of wages in just technology. So there are great job opportunities there, but we have to educate. But the issue will be, as we navigate more towards better and different type of technology, whether it's AI, alternative intelligence, you have artificial intelligence, that is going to be a fact. There was a good article in one of the papers today about how that's going to start changing jobs. We are going to have, and we have some companies right now, digital 3D printing. In fact, there's a new company that's building cars out of printing. And so you're going to see technology transforming how things are being done and how we think about it. It's something that we actually have to embrace, but it does create a lot of uncertainty. And so what I'm trying to ask everybody when I spend time in Washington, I was there last week, and I'll be in Frankfurt tomorrow, I try to tell everybody we have to embrace innovation, embrace change, but we also have to be sensitive and aware that change is harmful for a component of society. And so to embrace change, there is costs that have to be thought of too. It can't just be change for change for change. We have to be sensitive to the changes and how that impacts a component. And I think that is one of the reasons why we have the most unusual election seasons worldwide that we've seen in a long time, to put it that. Anyway, I think it's time for me to answer some questions. It's a real pleasure for me to be here. I can't tell you I'm a Gators fan. I am a Bruin. But I will say about public education for a second. My parents went to UCLA. They met at UCLA. I went to UCLA. My wife went to UCLA. My brother went to UCLA. And so it's, I'm a big believer in public education, and we need to make sure that we support great public institutions like Florida State University and other fantastic state universities. So I'll leave it at that.
You've been listening to a delayed broadcast of the Economic Club of Florida luncheon meeting of June 21st, 2016. This program was recorded at the Florida State University Alumni Center in Tallahassee. Join us again next time for another Economic Club of Florida luncheon meeting on WFSU-FM.